My brother thinks people today have worse quality of life than people in the Dark Ages. Is this a stupid take? I personally think it's pretty stupid. If a medieval royal opened my spice cabinet, they would have thought I was rich beyond my means. Even the richest didn't have running hot water or modern toilets. If you weren't held up in a castle, you were at risk of being slain in a raid. Yeah, today's day and age ain't so bad. Antibiotics and modern medicine is such a big one. So much of what we can fight off rather easily today would have been a death sentence back then. Not to mention the ability to travel quickly to specialists. Any king or emperor would pretty much prostrate themselves before you LMAO. Wait till you pull out some fresh fruit or meat. They would most likely think you were some kind of divine being, since that amount of wealth to acquire all of these things wouldn't even be something that they can comprehend. And then you show them a variety of teas or coffee, then offer to make them some with the clear, drinkable water that comes out of the walls, with a sink that drains back into the walls. It's an old concept, but their minds would implode at the sight of a Zippo lighter lighting up. That and a flushing toilet. You made me think of Hocus Pocus when Max briefly convinces the three witches from 1693 that he's a warlock because he had a flip lighter and could make fire in his hand. Even Laurel and Hardy had the light-up thumb routine in their films. Classic stuff. And that new-fangled outhouse, just down the hall, that is heated in winter. Now, some people still use the outdoors outhouse, because they don't think it's sanitary to do your business inside the house. And how are you going to keep dainty with that bought toilet paper when you know that a good corncob will get you cleaner, but would probably clog up the inside facilities? And show them the bowl of clean water that you keep in your bathroom. Clean drinkable water that you then take a shit in cause you just drank a triple coffee using fresh ground coffee beans from the other side of the world. LMAO, this had me because I hard paused and realized that is absolutely drinkable water. Until it entered that bowl, the Romans had hot and cold running water. Many of the drinking fountains you see in Europe's cities today were installed by the Romans, with clear drinkable water. But things like sanitation, power, furnaces, refrigeration, food available out of season, would blow their minds. Holy crap. I guess the saying is true, in Europe, 100 miles is far. In the US, 100 years is old. Not only did the Romans have clean drinking water available in fountains for anyone, you can go to Rome today and there are still such fountains scattered around the city. They're called Narsoni, and although the modern ones are for more recent, I think it's super neat that the basic premise has survived to the modern day. Everyone should have easy access to clean, fresh drinking water. Wait till you pull out some fresh fruit or meat. They would most likely think you were some kind of divine being. Buddy, when they saw my cell phone light up, they would fall to their knees in fear and awe because I am now their god. My cat lives a better life and she shits in a box, plays in her water dish, and swats her food around sometimes like the decadent bitch she is. I'm minding a cat that has 2 proximity-operated, induction-powered pump water fountains, giving filtered water. This cat's definitely not going to die of cholera, or more likely, burn you at the stake for witchcraft. Just wait till they see all of your aluminum foil. I think your brother doesn't know shit about the Dark Ages. People with these kind of takes only exposure to the medieval period is through media like Game of Thrones. He probably thinks sex and drinking were rampant and that there was no moral code to do whatever you wanted. I find a lot of people who say stuff like this have a weird, glorified idea of subsistence farming. I see so many people on dating apps write that their dream is to move out of the city and have their own farm. Girl, are you actually signing up for all that entails? Because I am not signing up to spend the rest of my life working 16-hour days outside taking care of a farm while you sit on the porch drinking coffee and looking at your cute goats and chickens, because it sounds like a more peaceful life that you'll get bored of in a week. My friend did this with his wife, moved in with his parents into the family farm and they gifted them a plot of land, tried to start a flower farming business. He ended up doing back-breaking labor all day every day, and she would come down and take a couple of pics for Instagram and then clear off. She told people they were homesteading. Unsurprisingly, didn't work out. They're still together, but not on the farm and not flower farming. Told my wife he'll do 95 of her projects if she does the last 5. There is still a 4x4 of unpainted wall in the kitchen after 4 years. There are 2 bags of mulch on the porch. All the chickens are dead. She didn't finish securing the fence by attaching it to the last post, so dogs got in. Her garden beds are full of weeds. And she eventually paid my brother to replace the last door in the house that needed replacing. Our bedroom. I took it off and left the new one next to it. I'm the only one with projects to do now. Maybe you should have gotten her to agree to do the first 5. Mister, big brain over here. Ha ha ha. No, it's easy to start a project. Painting the last bit of walls takes detail work, not just slapping a bunch of paint on. The last 2 bags of mulch are detail work again, not just dumping and spreading. She gets the easy work and the satisfaction of him doing not only the majority, but also the most detailed parts. I mean, it sounds like in practice, he's doing all of it right now. Anyway, if she's tasked with the first 5, then either she starts it and gets to be involved a little, or she never starts and there are no superfluous projects to finish. Not sure what a lot of people mean by farm, but I know a lot of people want what my in-laws have. They moved out to an acreage and have a massive garden, chickens and occasionally pigs. I don't consider it a farm, but I grew up on a grain farm. I think many people who didn't would consider it a farm. They have tons of veggies, eggs and chicken meat. They trade a lot of eggs for things from other locals around the area. Now, they also put a ton of effort into all that. Well, maybe not a ton, but it's still a decent amount of work on top of their normal 40-hour work week, but they're the kind of people who don't watch TV and enjoy that sort of work. I grew up in a family that did this primarily because it was how we could afford to feed ourselves. Well, we were in town, so no real room for livestock. But we had a huge garden in the backyard that basically fed us year-round with careful crop management and proper storage. Make no mistake, choosing to do this is not a small amount of work, but neither is it setting yourself up for 16-hour days just to feed your family. That's crazy nonsense. They want to be Marie Antoinette, who had a whole fake farm built just so she and her friends could play in it. Marie Antoinette and her friends would dress up as young shepherdess or milkmaids and wander around the hamlet pretending to be peasants, while still surrounded by the comforts of a royal lifestyle. A team of real farmers appointed by the Queen looked after the farm and the animals and produced fruits and vegetables consumed at the royal table. Marie Antoinette would sometimes milk the cows and the sheep herself to get a taste of village life before the Queen was expected. The story goes, the villagers would wash the goats and dress them in ribbons. She would invite the king and the rest of the royal family to garden parties, where, at a table set out under a bower of honeysuckle, she would pour out their coffee with her own hands, boasting of the thickness of her cream, the freshness of her eggs, and the ruddiness and flavor of her strawberries, as so many proofs of her skill in managing her establishment. Right next to Versailles, you can still visit it. Feels completely bizarre. I don't think they mean farming with tractors and 80 acres of fields to tend. I'm pretty sure they just mean a garden and some chickens. Entails? Get used to entrails. My friend wants to go live in a forest and kill rabbits to survive, just 'cause she went camping last year for 3 months. Just like the people who go on vacation to Myrtle Beach for the week with no budget and no responsibilities and now think they want to move there and their whole life will be a stress-free good time of getting drunk and frolicking in the waves every day, rather than all the same shit they deal with right now. Except now you're in a new place where you know nobody, and you're pissed about the never-ending tourist traffic and bored of the beach after a month, and stressed about how your cold doubled but your income didn't. This is hilarious and literally the reason my parents are divorced XD. Subsistence farming fucking sucks. As soon as China got rid of farm collectivization and loosened its grip on business, most of the rural population moved to cities as soon as they could. The West has no idea how good we have it. Even people who LARP as going off the grid benefit immensely from modern medicine and electricity. Even with cutting sugar out from your diet, stop going to the dentist for a few decades and you'll realize why our ancestors invented alcohol. There's a wide belief that people only worked 20 hours a week back in the olden days and took every other day off for religious festivals. It's based on gross misconceptions of what work meant back then and what holidays meant. I mean, sex and drinking were rampant. Always have been. Always will be. But you can have rampant sex and drinking with no modern medicine, climate control, sex education, nutrition, etc., etc. Or you can have it with all that. I like my rampant sex in a society with running water, soap, sewer systems, and toothbrushes. Also shows how little pay to attention to these kinds of shows because Gott went to great lengths in the books and the show to portray just how much it sucked ass. Even as nobility, people with these kind of takes only exposure to the medieval period is through media like Game of Thrones. Plus, they always figure they'd have been Tywin Lannister, at the top of the heap and with power and money. But for him to be on top, there had to be a couple thousand people on the bottom. And Op's brother would have been one of those. Yeah, back in the day, men were men and women were women. It was so much better. Might have been better for some people. But more likely you'd have been mucking out stables until one day they gave you a sword and no training and sent you to die in the mud fighting a battle whose causes you didn't know and wouldn't understand anyway because you didn't know to read. Off topic, but I've recently learned that the Dark Ages is officially an outdated term and doesn't really do the era justice at all. Blame Petrarch for that. He loved classical times and ignored all the improvements that medieval civilization had made. Very stupid. We have a better QOL than medieval royalty. Kings had entire troops of actors to make them plays. But yet we have instant access to entertainment. Kings had no air conditioning. Most people worked constantly and had very little. Health care was absolute ass, if existent at all. We could go on and on. Hell, get infected. And there was a good chance of death as they had no antibiotics. Most people had 10 kids because they knew half would die before age 5. Yeah, being one of the richer kings was arguably only better in having power and access to partners. By basically every metric, their life was worse. Worse food, worse entertainment, travel sucked, and even the less prosperous king's nobility just had everything worse. Also, I'd say that knowing there are lots of people who want your job, and they will literally chop your head off to get it, would be a very stressful situation. Researching my genealogy, I ran across a baron in Ireland in my lineage. There was an article about the family castle and how my folks lost the castle to their neighbors when the neighbors assembled an army of relatives and took the house by force. Imagine liking your next door neighbor's house and victory garden so you fucking wage war and take it. And then it's yours, until your other neighbors attack you. Entire naval expeditions to get things like pepper and cinnamon versus us spending 5 minutes and 5 to get more than a peasant would have access to in a lifetime. I'm not gonna lie, I've always wondered how far up the social ladder I could climb. If I time traveled to medieval England with a big-ass stash of Pop-Tarts and soda, you'd reach the top rung of a gallows with your magical sorcery, burned at the stake with his Pop-Tarts. That does blow my mind sometimes. I look at my spice rack and think how many people in history would go absolutely insane to see what I not only have, but what occasionally goes bad because I just don't use it quick enough. We have such easy access to spices. I don't mind throwing one away if it looks a little clumpy and buying a new one. The entire disease fighting thing was huge. I don't think people, especially OPS brother, realize how incredibly miserable life can be with untreated infections or even inflammation. They had no antibiotics, no painkillers, no anti-inflammatories. You felt like tea for a long time, then either died or survived. Imagine getting an eye infection even 100 years ago. It would be horrific. Yeah, there's a good reason why mortality rolls from back then listed teeth as a reason for death. A common tooth abscess without treatment could easily kill a person. Have these people ever had a cut get infected? I'm a chef. I constantly have little cuts and nicks around my hands and fingers. Occasionally one will get infected. I live in 2025, so even if I don't go to the doctor, I can wash it and keep it clean and dry and delegate work so that I don't have to use that hand. And it's still damn near unbearable. Imagine trying to hoe a field with a hand that's hot and swollen and in immense pain, and you have no access to soap or antibiotics or a day off to heal. Broken bones, gout, which is so easily treated now. Smallpox. My dad, who grew up in a one-room up, one-room down log cabin, was very fond of walking to the fridge, getting ice out of it, and proclaiming that he had it better than King Solomon. King Solomon never had an ice dispenser. Have fun wiping your ass in the cold with dried moss. Yeah, but your king still had to put up with whatever middling talents he could get to come to court, using handmade instruments and wooden sets and props, which would be embarrassing for a high school drama club today. Meanwhile, you can flip on your streaming service and watch eye-popping spectacles which cause your medieval king to believe that modern people were actual, bona fide wizards. Not everyone. Op's brother, for example, has his head in his ass, which is very uncomfortable. A historian has done a series on PRE modern peasant life and how it compares. TLDR, you'd be working a lot. The claim is usually that peasant working hours were much less, which is very inaccurate. You might have worked for someone for less hours in the day, but then spent the entire rest of the day working to keep yourself fed, clothed, and housed. If you were a woman, you would spend an ungodly amount of time spinning, weaving, sewing, repairing, washing clothing. If you were a man, you would spend an ungodly amount of time farming. If you were a kid over 13, you'd also be working. Shit deal. No matter how you slice it. Over 13? More like 7. You started working the moment you were capable of contributing. Don't forget contracting a spontaneous disease that will claim much of your children, or end your entire bloodline before anyone can prep a gravesite. It's funny how no one said this, but washing machines are one of the most underappreciated things in modern ages. People have no idea how time-consuming it is to wash clothes by hand. And today, you just throw all your dirty clothes in the washing machine, press a few buttons and few hours later, done. People, mostly women, literally had to sacrifice a day just to wash clothes. It was a fundamentally different system that doesn't map well onto today's world, and people have a hard time conceptualizing it for that reason. I think, also, it wasn't even a system. It's about 1,000 years of history spanning an entire continent of millions of people. You can't paint it all with one brush. Yeah, someone took days that are a holiday in some part of the kingdom and assumed they applied everywhere. But each city had its own feast days, and there were no weekends. Only Sunday off. Well, as someone who was born from a C-section, to a mother who was born, I think 2 months premature or something like that, my quality of life only exists in any form at all because I wasn't born more than 100 years ago, let alone the Dark Ages. My mum is dead. And even if she weren't, I'm dead. Putting that aside, I wear glasses, so the whole world would be quite blurry all the time back then. Both my parents also have worse vision than I do and would have been nearly blind without glasses, contacts, and eventually LASIK. That's before you get into the day-to-day life of not having 75 or more of my entire life be focused around getting food and water and meeting basic survival needs. It's an extremely stupid take. All but the poorest people in a developed country, at least, live much better than all but the wealthiest people in that time. And most live better than the wealthiest. In certain aspects, people literally threw poop out the window. Imagine dying from an infection because you stubbed your toe. QOL is so much better now that we take it for granted. You can speak to your smartphone and ask about anything, about our entire human existence. It will give a very detailed explanation, or at least attempt to give one with resources. You can learn any language, any recipe, any skill, etc. from YouTube or social media. You can order food, clothes, furniture, almost anything to your doorstep. You can instantly talk to people from a distance, so far away that a plane traveling hundreds of mph would take 14 hours to arrive. Cars can't fly yet, but they can drive and park themselves. Describing normal things from today would sound like absolute pure witchcraft and delusion to people just a few hundred years ago. Queen Victoria ruled a quarter of the world's land mass and nearly a 13th of the population of the world. It was the richest society of its time, and it came nearly 500 years after the end of the Middle Ages and nearly 800 after what you reasonably could call the Dark Ages. She still shit in a bucket by candlelight and couldn't get a banana whenever she wanted. The guy who begs for change outside of the gas station has access to luxuries she didn't. Queen Victoria's teeth were rotted to shit. If you were rich enough to afford sugar, then your teeth were in truly disgusting condition by the time you were an adult, and there was nothing to do about it. Life must have been so gross. Yay, that's a dumb take lol. People back then were dying from tooth infections and starving at 30. Today, we just complain on Wi-Fi. In Victorian England, meaning even after the Dark Ages, wealthy households would rent pineapples to display and not even eat them. Eating a pineapple would have been a garish display of opulent wealth. Has your brother ever eaten a pineapple? On pretty much all metrics, QOL is better now than then. That's why Thailand is the wealthiest country in the world, followed by the Philippines and Taiwan. The US is only on the 4th places based on the pineapple consumption. Yes, and factory workers worked 7 days a week or 10-hour shifts. Also, they were, super into making paints with toxic chemicals. The fact that we live in a world where people argue over whether or not flushable wet wipes are really flushable should really tell you all you need to know about the stupidity of this. Take, flushable wipes aren't flushable. The companies that make them lied because they knew less people would buy them if they weren't. It caused damage to lots of sites' sewer systems. Not really regular people's fault for falling for that, since it should be. Edit, illegal for companies to lie that brazenly on product names. Your brother is probably basing this on the fact that we work more days than medieval peasants. It's a meme. But we also aren't the property of some lord. We can travel, we go to school, we choose our own careers, we own cars, TVs, tons of clothes, etc. We eat very well, we have health care, and we don't work from sunrise to sunset, 6 days per week. We could also choose to work fewer days and just have fewer things, if we want. We have it better in every single way. Your brother is dumb. It's also like saying a seasonal farmer who's in the fields fewer days than I'm in the office has it easier. Medieval peasants had to dedicate a ton of their free time to other household chores and duties. It's also just wrong that medieval peasants work less than us. Sure, agricultural labor is seasonal and had to happen during specific periods, but during those times it was all day, and they had other stuff to do during the rest of the year, like making their own freaking cloth for clothes, etc. People didn't really have childhoods. You started contributing as soon as you could. Also washing clothes by hand or washboard. It's a task so arduous even the Amish use washing machines. The peasants worked less is also apparently a falsehood. Interesting web blog about it being written right now. Those big institutions, which could wield both legal and military force, in turn extracted high rents and often demanded additional labor from our peasants, which soaked up much of their available labor, leading to that range of 250300 working days a year, with 10-12-hour days each, for something on the order of 2,500 minus 3.6 working hours for a farm laboring peasant annually. So, they may have gotten more holidays, but they also didn't get Saturdays off. Meanwhile, salaries in the US are based off of working 2.08 hours, with the acknowledgement that you're supposed to be actually working less than that due to holidays or PTO if you have it. Life before antibiotics was pretty brutal. Tell him to dig a hole outside and take a shit there and think about how bad that time was for everyone. Yes, that's very stupid. On every metric, we have a much better quality of life. That not dying thing from getting the flu or a blister on your foot getting infected thing, along with much more widely available food and clean water means quite a bit. I'm having a hard time even imagining one metric that Op's brother thinks would have been better. It's a stupid take. Yes. Fun fact, childbirth used to regularly split vaginas open and tear into the rectum. That is 100 still a thing that happens every single day to way too many women. Your brother is ignorant. It could be true that we're less happy than they were. Having your family around and being social are the significant parts of being happy. Africans, who live in intense poverty and socially live like they did, tend to have fewer suicide rates than the developed world. I had to scroll way too far for this. Quality of life is a difficult measurement. There are countries with both the highest QOL and highest suicide rates. QOL is often measured by access to healthcare, food, safety, etc. But I wonder if we need to start taking purpose in life and psychological demands into account as well. If for the majority of people you don't have to think about rather it is okay to take or buy food from this place knowing they are committing atrocities because you believe in your church and them to help you with these questions, I can see how that can provide QOL even if you work more hours. We may not work as much, but we have a lot of responsibility and social constructs and awareness that goes way further than the common person in medieval times, I'd say. I don't say I agree with the statement, but to wave it away as a stupid thought without entertaining different points of view is IMO stupid. Yes, it's extremely stupid. Tell him he has the option of living like that if he wants. There is plenty of land to grub at, and showers to avoid, and modern medicine to not take. And simple food to boil. Seriously, I don't see how they don't see it. Literally just go to middle of nowhere, Montana or elsewhere, plant your ass down and start farming. He's probably thinking how, and I'm definitely not fully correct here, most of the serfs would only work for a set period of months, and then they will have the rest of the time free to themselves or whatever. Of course, I'm not sure what a medieval peasant would do in the middle of winter that could be better than having a heater and a fireplace and a television. That in itself is a misunderstanding of what work meant to serfs. The number of days cited as worked is the number of days the serf worked for their lord, without compensation. Or rather, that labor was the compensation for using the land. The serf would then need to fend for themselves with the remaining days of the year. Of course, it wasn't like the peasant worked for their lord 8 months straight, then themselves for months. It's a distribution of outputs question more than anything. In reality, serfs never had time off. A life of subsistence farming with feudal taxes simply doesn't allow it. The winter is for inhaling turf, smoke and animal farts. 247 inside of your not ventilated hut. And sex with your non-shaven, non-teeth cleaning wife that has a 10 chance to die if you knock her up. I use old.reddit.com chat does not work. It is obviously uninformed. Unless your brother is willing to discuss why he feels that having few individual property rights, no practical legal protections against the government, the threat of slavery, debt or prison, possibly for taxes, no reliable sources of clean water or disease-free food, rampant STIs, quackery masquerading as medicine, and a seriously lower life expectancy is a better quality of life, than just laugh and ignore his statement. He might decide the flat earth was better for science, and the constant warfare of the era was also better for economies. You missed the bit about the illiteracy. How old is your brother? If he's a child, then I can understand the naivete. However, if he is an adult, then he either is completely ignorant on the subject, very possible, and nothing is wrong with ignorance as long as you're willing to learn, or he's been listening to some sort of propaganda where we need to go back to the old ways. Oh, please inform your brother who wishes to live in the Dark Ages that he died of diphtheria aged 3 due to no vaccination. If he survived, he probably ailed with consumption and poverty before a premature death, not counting the lack of electricity and outdoor plumbing. No pizza, Chinese takeaway or DoorDash. Nope, we have better QOL than people in the 70s, 80 seconds, and 90 seconds. We have better medicine, GPS in your pocket, access to information, and equality. Time travel is strictly a majority fantasy. If you're the wrong color, you will end up a slave or worse. It's better to be a poor person today than a king in the Dark Ages. We have toilets and Big Macs, airplanes, Thai food, KPOP, cars, movies, books, literacy, education, whatever modern conveniences you can appreciate. A king from the Dark Ages would never have. This is the kind of opinion someone forms just to be contrary, difficult, and attempted edgy. It's not just wrong, it's so wrong it's stupid to say. An example from even later than the Dark Ages, Henry VIII had a leg injury when his horse fell on him during a joust. It developed into lifelong chronic ulcers that caused him terrible pain and declining health, and might have altered his personality and changed the course of history for the worse. Keep in mind, Henry had the best healthcare available at that time. He himself had an interest in medicine and public health and assembled a renowned team of surgeons to treat him. Today, if he's in a country with decent healthcare and has money insurance for healthcare, he'd go to the get imaging, have his wounds treated, get some antibiotics, and probably never develop later complications. He'd still need to control his weight and deal with his probable diabetes, but those things can be managed too. Are we talking about the same Dark Ages where they thought beating the devil out of people would have stopped the bubonic plague cause? But it's worth asking the follow-up of what specifically factors into quality of life for them. Perhaps they're using a weird metric like less screen time, better quality of life, which, in a vacuum, would make their case. Man, people in the Dark Ages couldn't even make to the age of 20. Is he on that stuff about how land slaves had so many days off? Why, you wouldn't last 24 hours in the Dark Ages. Most of us live better than medieval kings. Compared to the peasantry and urban poor, our lives are magical. And you don't have to go back to medieval times. Within living memory, in the early 20th century, people often worked 18-20-hour days in dangerous conditions for starvation wages, with no days off, including women and children. Working conditions were always dangerous and accidents happened constantly. There was no proper medical care or any sort of safety net, for instance, if people were crippled. The streets were full of beggars and starving street kids. You can actually go to many third world countries today and observe similar conditions. Did he say this while texting you on his iPhone? After parking his car from a leisurely night out with friends? Why does he think that? Has he studied the history of that time? An ingrown nail cut or a small cut on your hand could be a death sentence. People lived in literal filth. Only a moron would believe something so stupid. That's a very stupid take. If I can try to refine his argument though, people now have a really hard time finding purpose in life. In the Dark Ages, it was defend your border, have a ton of kids, and feed your family. Now, those things are mostly a given, so people get depressed trying to find purpose beyond that.